regime. Fourth, we passed from the perfect dictatorship of a party, like Vargas Llosa said, to a competitive regime of three parties, three principal parties, which are in real possibilities to get the power in Mexico. Five, we passed from the absence of certain rules to definitive electoral codes. In Mexico, it's prohibited to change the law 90 days before the electoral process is begin. That is an important rule for the certainty of the process. Six, we passed from the only one-party winner rule, which was the PRI won all the elections, to the uncertain outcome of next elections. Seven, we passed from the so-called patriotic fraud, because the PRI itself called it was a patriotic fraud, you know, a service to the country, to the generosity in the laws, because transition would not be possible without generosity of PRI itself, who recognized his laws in 2000 and 2006. Eight, we passed from official propaganda, censorship, to full freedom of speech and free press. Nine, from the primacy of economy to the primacy of politics. We learned that politics must rule even over economy. PRI regimes postponed the political changes, giving privilege to the economic changes. But that was not enough. People wanted more than good results in economy. At the end, every 6 years, when every president of PRI left the power, a crisis came. So something was wrong in the fundament. And finally, we passed from an sclerotic political organization to a dynamic and changing legal regime, which means always the law will change and the model of the system will be in continuous and dynamic change. A final reflection on the role of youth people. The January revolution in Egypt and all the changes we've seen will not be possible without youth participation. And I think that the transition and the head of the transition and the changes in government will not be possible if youth people don't have their own space. I am fortunate to be 36, and I'm fortunate to have been the president of the governing party in Mexico until last December, and I thank these opportunities, and I think that youth people in Egypt and all the Arab countries and the Middle West East countries must have this opportunity. Not by a quota, by their own merits. Youth people must be qualified as any people, as an adult people with the same rights, but with the same responsibility. Thank you very much.
Mr. Cesar Nava, thank you very much for a very inspiring comparison and injecting a sense of hope. Thank you very much indeed. Our last speaker in this part of the session is His Excellency Amin Rais from Indonesia. He's leader in the Muhammadiyah movement, and he's a former Speaker of the Indonesian Parliament. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I am honored to be here to share our experience with Egyptian brothers and sisters. And probably I was one of the witnesses who not only observed the transition of power from Suharto to the next government, but also to a great extent I belong to the players who were on the national stage to facilitate the transition of power. But let me tell you a very simple story. Suharto was really mad when some students said that Suharto is basically like Fir'aun. When people launched any criticism, he was so controlled. I mean, he couldn't control his emotion. But when some students in my university said that basically he was like Fir'aun, and then he got mad and he lost his school. But I believe, as a Muslim, I always read the Holy Quran. Those authoritarian leaders, I believe, have learned a lot from what was committed by Fir'aun to lengthen his power. From the Holy Quran, I learned that Fir'aun coalesced with the three other elites, with Qarun, inna Qarun min qawmi Musa. So Qarun is the representation of the business and economic elite. And then Haman is the representation of the technocratic elite. And the other elite was Balaam, even though it is not mentioned in the Quran, but there are many exegetes who said that it was Balaam who became spiritual leader, and then he misused his spiritual and religious teaching from protecting the truth into defending the wrong. So from this perspective, I would say that every single authoritarian leader always make great coalition with other elites for what? Of course, to lengthen, to stay in power as long as possible. And especially in Indonesia, as I observed when I was young, 13 years ago, I was saying, and beautiful, not I'm an old man. The way Suharto controlled his people, first of all, is by controlling the intelligence. He misused intelligence to spy on his own people. And then there are many, many cases in which we could take a conclusion that Suharto had been using his intelligence body to to fabricate stories to make the political antagonists of his was sent into prison. Then secondly, Suharto controlled the mass media. Mass media was really the mouthpiece of his policy. And then once a newspaper went against him, not too long, in 3 or 4 days, the mass media will be scrapped up. And then thirdly, I believe that Suharto was implementing psychology of fear. So he developed psychology of fear to make his own people fear of him in a very such manner that people dare not to open their mouth. There's a joke in my country: if you got a toothache, you have to go to Singapore, because you have to open your mouth in Singapore. You cannot open your mouth in Indonesia. I think this joke is really at the time so prevailing everywhere in my country. But you know, there is a sunnatullah, the law of nature, so to speak, that whatever a leader wants to stay in power as long as he wishes, that finally he will crumble. And Suharto in his last days was suffering from Louis XIV syndrome, l'état c'est moi. He identified his interests with the national interests. If some critics say bad things about his family, and then he said that criticizing his family is equal to criticizing the state and the nation. So we could understand very easily when people have been deprived on the freedom of speech, and then the situation was aggravated by the worsening economic situation, and then people finally become explosive, and then the people only needed some other leaders to speak out, to go against and challenge Mr. Suharto. I was very proud because at the time, even though I was teaching in the in with the hinterland campus, not in Jakarta, not in the capital, but I launched the necessity of succession as a prerequisite of reform. At the time, I said that reform is just beyond comprehension if there is no succession first. I, from town to town, campus to campus, always emphasized the necessity of succession. And then from Surabaya, when I launched the issue as a small and insignificant news, but over time, in 4 or 5 years, the issue became so unstoppable, and finally Suharto was made to stand down in 21st May of 1998. Yeah. There are some lessons which I can withdraw to share with you. First of all, people all over the world will rebel against their government if the people are deprived of their legal, political, and economic and social rights. The saying is that man does not live by bread alone. Even though for the 20 years of his power, Indonesia, people were well fed, well dressed, but people became angered and frustrated, and it became a huge explosion in the days of the peak of the reform. And then secondly, leader who has been in power too long, his vision will be diluted. He could not distinguish between wrong and right, between evil and good, between haram and halal, between forbidden and permitted, and something like that, And then the third thing is that every single authoritarian leader usually put his family interests on above the national interest. And then there is also one single characteristic which is very, very important to note, i.e., that the leader has to serve the interests of the foreign forces for the sake of staying in power as long as possible. So please don't trust too much with the policy of the superpower, especially Washington. My experience in Indonesia, I don't know your experience in Egypt, but my Indonesian experience tells us very clearly that top leaders in my country, in order to stay in power, most of the time ask the help of the foreigners to intervene or make intervention. And for the sake of, how to call it, well, for the sake of making the foreign superpowers believe you, and then most of the time you have to sacrifice your own interests, your national interests. In Indonesian case, I would say that the economic interests of the people have been sacrificed for the interests of this conglomeration for this corporatocracy. This is, I think, a very important element, because when we do not have freedom of action to build our future, but we have to respond to the interference of Washington, or for that matter, other big capitals, you are bound to fail. the reason why Indonesia has been harvesting a lot of positive things through the reforms, but until now, the twin problems of unemployment and poverty are still enduring, are still prevailing, and so corruption is still very, very, very intact, because I do believe that Indonesian people are not that free. So I see a very strong similarity between Egypt and Indonesia. We are basically Muslim countries, but for a long, long time, we have been unbalanced in practicing our foreign policy. We are too pro-Western oriented, and then we lost our freedom of action, and then don't ever be surprised if at the bottom line you don't have economic freedom either. The last thing I want to emphasize is that last week, Mr. Habibie, who gave the keynote speech in the first session, he said that l'histoire repeat itself. L'histoire se répète. Now the economic colonialism, the economic imperialism has returned in Indonesia, and the situation probably is much, much worse than 300 years ago when we were colonized by Dutch. The last sentence I like to make is that watch out the corporatocracy. Corporatocracy is the combination of, let me be blunt, very, very sharp. I use the intramural freedom because it is also recognized by some American professors, that corporatocracy, which controls the world, consists of military power, as presented by Pentagon, political power, which is the White House, and then the Congress, and then the mass media, and even intellectuals. So before Eisenhower retired, he said that he was very, very concerned with the development of military-industrial complex. But what we are seeing now is military-industrial congressional media complex, which try to control the globe, which want to dominate, to have hegemony all over the world. And Egypt is a very strategic country. Even Egypt is the kiblat of some Muslim countries in terms of economic, social, political development. So I hope that your country will be in a very good shape. Also, I know that it is not that easy, but only through free, secret, responsible, and honest election, you can say goodbye to the past. Yeah. This is what we have. Through transparent, free, secret, responsible election, we can change Indonesia from the past to the promising future.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for a very informative and sincere, sympathetic comparison between the Indonesian scene and the Egyptian one. Moving to the second part, I just seek your indulgence. I have to leave the place, although I'm enjoying every bit of it. I'm learning from every word that has been said, and I will turn the moderator's job to my very dear friend and brother and colleague, Dr. Saadin Ibrahim, hoping that we will get 2 minutes recess to allow me just to go to the other side of the building. And thank you and enjoy every bit of it. And my consolation is that I was told during the lunch time or the lunch break, that everything will be on a disk that will be distributed or at least made available to me. Thank you for your indulgence. And just I'm trying to remember or to remind you that I did a mistake when I said that each one of the three speakers will have 10 minutes. They had 20 minutes, but it is a little bit late to say that now. Every discussant will have 10 minutes, but of course, the three main international speakers will have time to engage in discussion when time is due. Thank you very much indeed, and bon courage. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. May I now, after thanking the main speakers, ask the commentators to take the floor in the same order that is written in the program. I don't know if there is Mr. Naguib Sawiris is here or not? He is not. All right, very good. We have 4 commentators, Mr. Mazen Sakit from Jordan, Mr. Ghazi Garoudi from Tunis, Mr. Ayman Sayyad from Egypt, and Ahmed Zahran from Egypt. So let's start with Mr. Mazen Sakit. تفضل Mr. Mazen Sakit.
شكرا دكتور. مساء الخير السيدات والسادة. في هذه المرحلة التاريخية في منطقتنا حيث نشهد تحولا عميقا وشاملا في واقع الحراك الشعبي والشبابي أساسا، مفيد أن نستمع إلى تجارب عديدة في التقدم نحو الديمقراطية، وأيضا مفيد أن نتوقف دائما لنحلل الظواهر ونقيم، لأن في ذلك معرفة للواقع وتحليل للأسباب ورؤية لآفاق المستقبل وماذا نريد. بداية اسمحوا لي بشكل سريع أن أتحدث بأن التوغل الحرية في هذه المنطقة على الأقل في العصر الحديث جاء مع واقع النهضة في بداية القرن الماضي، وشهدنا حراكا هاما وشاملا في المنطقة، وكان من أهم حراك الإصلاح الديني الذي مع الأسف قطع هذا الحراك ولم نستكمله، إضافة إلى الحراك الأحزاب البرلمانية الدستورية، وذهبنا في مصادفة تاريخية نتيجة تزامن سايس بيكو مع ثورة أكتوبر الاشتراكية، فذهبنا إلى خيار معسكر التحرر في ذلك الحين، وإلى صراع المعسكرات، وإلى تبني الموقف التحرري باتجاه المعسكر الغربي في معظم أحزابنا وفكرنا السياسي. هذه مسألة بعتقد في غاية الأهمية حتى ندرك لماذا توقف التطور الطبيعي لتبني الحركة السياسية العربية وأحزابها التوجه نحو والاستمرار في الحياة البرلمانية والتوجه نحو الحياة الديمقراطية. هذه مسألة تتعلق بما كان سائدا من سياقات ومن تفكير ومن أيديولوجيات ومن فكر سياسي في تلك المرحلة ويجب أن نحاكمه في سياقه. ولذلك عشنا تجارب عديدة وشهدنا نجاحات وفشل، ثم شهدنا في أواخر الثمانينات بداية النهضة الجديدة للتحول نحو الديمقراطية مع اتضاح مأزق النظام الشمولي في تجاربه المتعددة الدولية والعربية. ووعدنا وأملنا بنهوض جديد للحياة الديمقراطية البرلمانية، مع الأسف لم يتحقق نتيجة أيضا مجمل عوامل. كان هناك مصادفة تاريخية اسمها سقوط المعسكر الاشتراكي والقطب الواحد ونظام القطب الواحد والعولمة التي عادت مرة أخرى وفرضت شروطا جديدة، خاصة في النظام الاقتصادي السياسي، بحيث يعني فرض علينا بعتقد نظاما اقتصاديا لم نكن مؤهلين ولسنا بعد مؤهلين للتعامل معه. فشهدنا تحولا نحو اقتصاد مالي نقدي على حساب الاقتصاد الإنتاجي والخدمي والسلعي. شهدنا نموا بدل التنمية، شهدنا سوءا في توزيع نتائج هذا النمو، شهدنا تمركزا في الثروة، شهدنا فسادا غير مسبوق مؤسسي، وشهدنا بنفس الوقت تقدما في التعليم هائل، تخريج مئات الآلاف من الشباب إلى سوق عمل نزرت به فرص العمل. فشهدنا هذه الثورة الشعبية في مصر، في تونس، ثم في مصر، ثم في كل أرجاء الوطن العربي. هذه الحقائق لابد من ذكرها عندما نتحدث عن دور الحركة السياسية والأحزاب والحركة الشعبية ومنظمات المجتمع المدني، لأني أعتقد أن هذه الحركة هي حركة عفوية فاجأتنا. أنا من الجيل الذي عاش الحركة السياسية طويلا وعمل بالحركة السياسية والأحزاب والحركة الطلابية، وشهدت تراجعها في كل المجالات باستثناء الاتجاه الإسلامي في الشارع السياسي العربي. وفي هذه اللحظة التاريخية شهدنا مفاجأة في تقدم الشباب للتعبير عن حالة الرفض للواقع، عن حالة المطالبة بالحريات، عن حالة الرفض لما وصلنا إليه في واقع أنظمتنا السياسية وحياتنا الاقتصادية والمعيشية. وأدعي أن الأحزاب لحقت هذا الحراك ولم تسبقه ولم ترافقه، وهذه مسألة طبيعية يجب أن لا ينزعج منها الأحزاب السياسية، لكن أيضا هذه تؤشر على أن التحولات الديمقراطية التي حدثت منذ الثمانينات إلى الآن في الفكر السياسي العربي لم تكن تجاه تبني الخيار الديمقراطي، لم تكن عميقة أو شاملة، وبقيت عبارة عن تبني لشعار أحيانا يقصد به بيان ضد الحكومات. وأيضا الأنظمة التي يعني تبنت